You can have a seat. So, is anybody in the situation where sometimes your spouse gets mad? Okay. But my spouse may or may not be in the room still. I don't know if she's working in the kids program today, but so I'm going to stick to total truth stories here. But there was another guy, not me, who apparently got mad a lot and never was violent physically or wasn't mean spirited, but he just yelled and cursed and swore, and it was rubbing off on the kids, and it was making his spouse really angry. And finally, he's noticed that no matter how rambunctiously immature and angry he got, she stayed remarkably calm. And in one of his calmer moments, which there were also, he said, "When I get mad at you, you never fight back. How do you stay so calm?" And she said, "Well, I go and I clean the toilet." And he says, "Well, how does that help?" And she said, "With your toothbrush." So some of you chuckled early because you knew it was coming. Uh, and that would be a great start to a sermon. If the sermon were entitled "How to Reduce Your Anger by Multiplying Your Meanness," that might be a workshop for church, but it's not the message. It's not exactly that. What it is today is we're in the final week of our Lenten series called Redemption Stories. And we have, for the last 4+ weeks, because even though we were in a different series on the first Sunday of Lent, it had the same redemptive vibe to it. We've been looking at stories where people who are either exiled from their community or looked down on in their community or just feeling terrible about themselves, even possessed by demons or illness or all sorts of addictions, all those things we've looked at and how God, through Jesus and the good news, redeemed their lives. Not all the way to the end, right? I mean, there was more work they had to do, but we've talked about those kind of redemptions. And allow me to quickly review. So we started this month with the woman at the well. She was an outcast woman who was redefined and given a new purpose after she had this interaction with Jesus. So now she'd been married 6 times and she was living with a guy that she wasn't married to. I think she didn't want to try 7. That must have been an unlucky number, but she was clearly making decisions or agreeing to a system that left her on the outside looking in. In fact, she was so left out and so ostracized that she had to go to the well in the city in the middle of the day when nobody else would go because it was too darn hot. She was that bad. So, but what happened is that after kind of a little hard edge conversation with Jesus, not mean, not super accusatory, but kind of just truth telling, she decided to change her life. And she did it by redefining who she was. And when she redefined who she was, not as an immoral woman or not as a consecutive failure at multiple marriages, she defined herself as someone who was going to believe and proclaim the Messiah. And she's in some ways considered the first evangelist because she went into her city and told everybody about what Jesus and her had talked about, what Jesus had done. So you can imagine if you've had 6 husbands, you're probably not a wallflower, right? Somehow you got men's attention. Instead of using those gifts to do more of the same, of living her life the same as it always was, she used her gifts to proclaim the Messiah. How that must have changed her. To feel her identity was different and to feel that the one reason it was is because she was a daughter and redeemed by the Messiah. Well, this one's a little bit of a scarier picture, right? But I found it because I think it sums it up well. Yeah, this is the Gerasene demoniac. I know when I preached about it, I had all sorts of ancient paintings, a guy in a tunic and he's, spitting out demons and they're going in the pigs and running in the. So, but as we're summing it up, I wanted you to think of that in a more serious way. I want you to think of it as a man who spent years being functionally useless. He lived in a cemetery and he was essentially violent. He was so violent probably because he knew that he was a joke to the community he grew up in. And so he returned that favor of being degraded by being a dangerous force in the community. But now Jesus healed him. I'm not going to go give you the whole story, but Jesus healed him and gave him a new lease on life. And he appeared after the healing, fully dressed, in his right mind, and ready to volunteer. In fact, he volunteered with Jesus to hop in the boat with him and join the disciples. He goes, I don't care if I'm a 13th wheel, I'll do it. Let me go. And this was the story I talked about where Jesus said no. Jesus said no to him. He wanted a meaningful life, and he came up with a plan to follow Jesus that he thought would do it. But Jesus said no because before he re entered society and could make a difference in the world out there, Jesus knew he had to go through the much harder task of getting reintegrated into his family. The people that knew his junk, the people who had maybe driven him to the cemetery, or the ones who he drove crazy enough that he finally had to leave. Jesus heard his offer, I'll serve you this way, and he countered with an offer that said, no, I want you to do something harder. I want you to go home. In the first case, it was the woman who made the decision to be something different. In this case, Jesus made the decision for him. In the next case, Jesus makes a decision again, and that was, of course, the woman taken in adultery, what we talked about last week. Now, so this was society's most headline-grabbing sinner, right? The woman who's caught en flagrante with a man, and then she was dragged into the center of this village area to be stoned, and of course, somehow the man got away. Who knew? But she's the one who's going to be punished, and this is Jesus shining his light on our tribal meanness, our tribal judgment, and our tendency to hypocrisy. In this case, Jesus made the decision to save her, which he did very coyly and awesomely. If you know the story, you're nodding your head. If you don't, go back and look it up. John 8, great story. And told her to aim higher with the second chance at life that she'd been given. He told her to aim higher. We talked about how we like to say, if we're kind of in the judgy mood, like, well, he saved the sinner, but he told her to go and sin no more. Well, actually, he told her to go and quit missing the mark. That's what the Greek word means. Quit missing the mark. Aim for something not only more moral and ethical, but doggone it, aim for something better for yourself. He didn't tell her to be a different person. He didn't say she was covered in shame and only he could take it away. He showed her that he took it away, and he challenged her to make different choices. Well, today, we look at not an actual story, an episode that happened in Jesus' life. Today, we're going to look at an episode, a story that Jesus told in the course of his life. And if you've been paying attention or listening, we are going to talk about a parable with a name that's familiar, with a parable that's familiar, but I'm giving it a different name. And the goal is to get us to think about one of the demons that haunts all of us. Most of us haven't been married 6+ times. Most of us haven't lived naked in a cemetery, right? As far as I know. Most of us haven't been caught in the act of adultery. But most of us have been caught being bitter. In fact, most of us are trying to quit being bitter and angry and resentful, but it's so darn easy and so gratifying. So whatever you learned from the first 3 messages, I think this one's for you. Now speaking of bitter, I mentioned that in the sermon segue, but how are you K-State fans feeling? Let me show you and role model for you my lack of bitterness. This is a photo from them defeating the Michigan State Spartans, who I really thought had a chance. Now, their coach is different. Tom Izzo, way different than Jerome Tang. I think Tom Izzo yells at people when they lose. Jerome grabs their shoulder and hand. That's why it was so heartbreaking when they lost. But at the same time, I'm not bitter. I actually was going to bring one of my hold up Spartans and put it on the altar, but I thought that seemed a little idyllic. So I'll just leave it in its proper place, which is on my passenger seat, and I put it on the dashboard when I'm parking. So, yeah, Daniel, it's the truth. So anyway, so everybody's brackets have been busted for well over a week. I mean, regardless of what you were thinking K-State would do. But there's this interesting professor at a college in Western Pennsylvania who has a remarkable strategy for building his brackets. As your spiritual guide here today, I thought I would share it with you. So the dude's name is Michael Wolff. He's a professor of philosophy at Washington and Jefferson, and a tenured one at that, which is why he probably feels more secure to publish what he publicly calls his bitterness bracket. He says this about his bitterness bracket. I have very little knowledge about the head-to-head stats of college basketball, but one thing I do know is that I have a series of long-standing grudges against many colleges and universities. I was on the job market on and off for 12 years before I finally met success. I'm now tenured, which is a huge thing if you're a professor, and which puts me in some ridiculously rare percentage of all candidates. But I also applied to hundreds more. And like all other candidates, got jerked around furiously by some of those. So every year, I pick an NCAA bracket based entirely on my lingering bitterness toward the schools. It's cathartic, really. Very good for me. Imagine the Emperor from Return of the Jedi hissing, "Let the hate flow through you," as you pick your bracket. Well, that's one way to process resentment. Won't necessarily recommend that. Um, but that is the point that we're going to end with today. One of the ways we can help people see themselves as parts of God's redemption story, and frankly, people, how you and I can be assured that we're part of God's redemption story, because He may not have redeemed us from those very public trials and sins that we read about in the first 3 Sundays, but everybody here has flirted with the idol of bitterness. We might make fun of it, we might joke about it with our peeps, but we have all flirted with it. And this is a story of Jesus telling people who were inclined to be bitter what bitterness can do. So let's look now at that thing. It's called that message is called the prodigal son. Well, it's called the prodigal son. I might challenge that a better name would be the bitter older brother. So I'm not even going to talk about the first part. If you don't know the beginning of the prodigal son, it'll be great reading for you after lunch. Well, after you buy a bunch of cookies, I think is the way to say that. But this is how it starts. When he was still, well, I'll give you a little bit of hint. So basically, the younger brother takes half of dad's money. Dad had to sell at fire sale prices because he was trying to indulge his younger son. And so dad reduces their capital, their cash flow by half, gives it to the younger brother. He goes off to try living his own life, which basically means he paid people to be his friends, and he spent a lot of money on what the Bible generously calls loose living. Scripture tells it a little more bluntly in just a second. So anyway, the father is sad about that. His older son, however, stays home to kind of manage the ranch, keep things going, and kind of help his dad get over the loss and the indignity of having his son be such a jerk, his younger son. So verse 20 to 21, this is from the Message. When he was still a long way off, that younger brother, his father saw him. His heart pounding, he ran out, embraced him, and kissed him. And the son said in his speech that he had prepared, "Father, I've sinned against God and I've sinned before you. I don't deserve to be called your son ever again." Now, if you're the older brother, do you think you've noticed that your dad keeps one eye on the road? That your dad positions the rocking chair on the front porch so that he looks into the distance? You ever notice that maybe your dad doesn't spend as much time out with you, but he spends a lot of time on the porch just looking? If you're an older brother, you don't miss that. This is the backdrop of the bitterness of the older brother. But the father wasn't listening to the younger son. He was calling to the servants, "Quick, bring a clean set of clothes and dress him, put the family ring on his finger and sandals on his feet, then get a grain-fed heifer," so like an organic beef thing, "and roast it. We're going to feast. We're going to have a wonderful time. My son is here." My son. Oh, yeah. Yeah, the other one's in the field. But my son is here, given up for dead and now alive, given up for lost and now found. And they began to have a wonderful time. I wonder if he's ever slipped when the older brother was around and accidentally said, "Someday my son will come home." And the brother's like, "Dad, hello. That's That's the soil that's fostering the bitterness. At this time, though, all this time, his older son was out in the field. And when the day's work was done, he came in. As he approached the house, of course, he heard the music and the dancing. Calling over one of the houseboys, he said, "What's going on?" And the boy told him, "Your brother came home. Your father's ordered a feast, barbecued beef, brisket, burnt, the works, because he has him home safe and sound." Huh. So the thing my dad's been waiting for years happened. There's plenty of houseboys here. Nobody came out to get me. Was that intentional? Or was it like usual, just dad forgetting that I'm here? The older brother stalked off in an angry sulk and refused to join in. His father came out and tried to talk to him, tried to talk him into joining the celebration. The son said, "Look, how many years have I stayed here serving you, never giving you one moment of grief, but you've never ever thrown a party for me and my friends." The "and my friends," I think, is important. Because sometimes our bitterness doesn't just happen because of what we feel was done wrong to us, but how embarrassed we are by what other people see has happened to us. So the friends there, "Have you ever thrown a party for me and my friends?" "No, Dad. You're so busy on your darn rocker on the front porch." Then this son of yours, who has thrown away your money on whores, shows up and you go all out with a feast. The Bible always says loose living, in case there's kids in the room. But this is the intensity of his reaction. He is trying to humiliate his father and remind him how humiliated his younger brother made him, and now he's going to join the bandwagon. I don't care how good you feel that he's back. You know what? This is what he does, and everybody knows it. And you should know it and care what people think, because I do. And this is what the father said: "Son, you don't understand. You're with me all the time, and everything that is mine is yours. But this is a wonderful time, and we had to celebrate because this brother of yours was dead, and now he's alive. This brother of yours was lost, and now he's found." Well, we've preachers preach through, including this story all the time. And I ask you, have you ever felt taken for granted? Like the older brother must have. Maybe you're the salaried employee who's the first to show up at work and the last to leave. Maybe you're the sibling who takes care of the little kids, or maybe as you get older, you take care of your aging parents. And the other siblings are great. You love them, they love you, and they love your mom and dad, but it seems that they live on the east or west coast and they don't often come in to help. And then when your mom and dad see them, their face lights up. And you don't want to be bitter. You know why it happens, but it's still a little hard. Maybe you're the kid or the employee in the team project, and you're the one that carries all the water. You track the assignments, you track the responsibilities, you make sure things happen. And then when y'all get together as a team, you find out nobody else did their job. The kids didn't do their homework because they had a busy weekend. And you think to yourself, I hate working in groups. I want to be by myself. And then what would your be reaction if you were the older brother, if you ever are the person who's the last to know about a party, maybe a party that your friends have, maybe you're just not in a really fun Facebook post and you wonder why. Do you think the older brother hates his younger brother? Does he hate his father more? And is he just clamping that down? Or does he not know what it feels exactly in the inside other than to be forgotten, taken for granted? Of all the negative emotion, anger and bitterness are the most harmful one. And that's why Jesus ends the story without saying, "And after hearing that, his son decided to go inside." There's no conclusion. We don't know what he does. And that's why it's such a pointed parable, because the ball is in our court to decide if we're in that same situation, what are we going to do? Well, I say if. We are all in a similar situation somewhere, sometime in our lives. And what do we do? Do we just count up all the things that really legitimately have been wrong and then say, I'm not going to be a part of it. I'm drawing a boundary. I'm going to be safe behind it and you guys have fun. Well, that's not a bad decision to make. But have you processed how you got there? No, it's pretty clear that the first trigger of anger activates a little organ inside your brain called the amygdala. Here's a picture that I grabbed of it right now. Oh, geez. All right, that's the amygdala. Okay, here we go. This is why you shouldn't use chatbot to build your sermons, and or just double check, right? So here's the amygdala. It's this little guy. Here's actually a better drawing of it. The brains are switched there. The amygdala activates the hypothalamus, which signals the pituitary gland, releasing a hormone that affects control of the gland's stress hormones, cortisol, adrenaline, noradrenaline. So all these kind of bad things are creeping into your body. These stressful fight or flight things are creeping in your body. The high cortisol levels cause a loss of the neurons in your prefrontal cortex. So these stop firing. This is, of course, what helps you make the good decisions, but you're still in that little P-shaped thing in the inside of your brain, making quick decisions because you think, I've got to fight or flee or hide. Likewise, the cortisol kills the neurons in the hippocampus, which shortens your memory, which reduces your short-term memory. So you can't think straight, you can't remember what they just said to try to de-escalate. All you are is mad and you're fighting back. And the long-term effects of these are known to us. Gradually over time, that high cortisol, it hardens the arteries, it decreases the amount of happiness hormone, the serotonin that you have, which if your happiness is decreased, what rises? Your unhappiness. And when your unhappiness rises and you don't live by yourself on an island, what happens then? You become really unpleasant to be around. Spouse notices, children notice. Hopefully, they don't pick it up and do the same to their friends and family as well. But anyway, anger triggers down like a downhill snowball, wreaking havoc in its path. So you could say being angry triggers a royal set of bad consequences. Well, what it does is it makes us angry, grouchy, and laughable. Serious. So at the end of the sermon, I'm going to challenge you, invite you. Well, if it were Jesus, he'd challenge you, so I'll just stick with that. I'm going to invite you to go back into one of 6 prayer stations. They'll all be lit up with a candle. They're not just for Christmas anymore. All right, well, theirs will work. And if you want to bring something that's on your heart, whether especially it's your frustration or anger or bitterness or your relief that you were finally able to let those things go, because bitterness can be addicting, right? It keeps on making things rationalize. But you can't just lawn mow the weeds of bitterness. You have to pull it up by the roots. This is what Paul said about people who have not pulled up their bitterness by the roots. Their talk is foul like the stench from an open grave. Their tongues are filled with lies, and snake venom drips from their lips. Their mouths are full of cursing and bitterness. The bitterness that we have deep inside of us, it leaks. And it shows up in our language and it shows up in our thoughts. Here's what Moses said, or what the Lord said to Moses. He said, I'm making this covenant with you and my people, so that no one among you, no man, no woman, no clan or tribe, will turn away from the Lord our God to worship these gods of other nations. Well, that sounds about right, right? He just got them out of Egypt. They all went through the Red Sea together. Hey, victory, and now we're going to go settle the promised land. Everything's all about being faithful to God. And then you're like, what? And so that no root among you bears bitter and poisonous fruit. We often talk about our Christian life as being centered on Christ, like the vertical part of the cross, but it's got arms, the horizontal part, that reach out toward others. And that's exactly what God is telling the people of Israel to do back in the Hebrew scriptures. He's like, stay true to God, but stay true by making sure that you don't wreck the relationships all around you, because that will hurt the clan and hurt the tribe. So I just grabbed this picture of a root. That's deeper than I like to pull, right? Especially if it's dry. I mean, who's going to really take a hose, water their weed so you can pull it all the way out? Oh my God, that's what chemicals are for. But that's not how it works in our heart. Anger and bitterness will eventually take root in us, in our families, in our communities, in our Facebook chat. And it just can't be cut off at the surface. The unknown writer of Hebrews, it's a New Testament book after Jesus, even though it's called Hebrews. Watch out that no poisonous root of bitterness grows up to trouble you, corrupting many. You hear that? Your bitterness, if you decide to hold on to it, is going to corrupt. And that's why I invite you, Jesus challenges you to let go of the bitterness. Now, there's going to be prayer ministers, like I said, in the back. There's guys back there, there's women back there, there's a couple back there. And my suggestion is that you think, does anybody still eat Tic Tacs? Or were those like in the day thing? Think about TAC, TAC. Thank, ask, confess. Thanking God is pretty easy. You may have been in a place where you were really bad off and now you're grateful. And so go pray to thank God for that, especially if it involves some degree of releasing your anger. Or maybe you're in the middle of it and you're going to ask God for the strength to get rid of your anger, to get rid of your sense of competition and comparison, to get rid of your sense of injustice. And then the C is the hardest, it's confess. Do you have something that you don't know what to do with? The prayer minister ain't going to tell you, but he's going to help you say to God, I just confess that I'm in this mess emotionally, personally, and I don't know what to do. It's those things, brothers and sisters. It's people who keep looking for greener grass somewhere else, right? Instead of looking inside. It's people that are wrestling with demons of our own. Maybe we're addictions, compulsions, and we're so depressed and angry, but we can't imagine living any differently. Or maybe it's simply that we've been treated unfairly. The other people got away with it and we didn't. Or today, that maybe there's bitterness, anger, and it just keeps leaking and you can't let it go. Jesus said this, come to me, all of you who are weary and carry heavy burdens, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you, let me teach you, because I am humble and gentle at heart, and you will find rest for your souls. For my yoke is easy to bear, the burden I give you is light. Friends, I'm going to ask you as Dave starts playing to consider, you don't have to. We're not going to wait here like 15 minutes and you got to like twiddle your thumbs. You don't have to go back. But I tell you, even this man who stands before you and attempts to explicate God's word, I've got some talking to do to God. I'm going to go to one of those lights in the back and have them help me. So now may this invitation from Jesus, may it take root in your heart. And if this is the time the Holy Spirit's pushing you, may you find a prayer partner here or somewhere else and give your burdens to Jesus.